All right, well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining the GBSN for Energy Transitions virtual series, Powering the Energy Transition, A Tale of Two Hemispheres. We are thrilled for our third event in this series, which will be focused on technology. As a few housekeeping reminders, this session will be recorded, so please keep your microphones muted. We have reserved time to address the audience questions at the end of today's program. That being said, we encourage you to drop questions and comments in the chat at any time and to respond to others. Lastly, we invite you to use the chat to introduce yourselves and where you're joining from. If you'd like to say a few words about the interests that brought you here, please feel free to add those as well. And now I'd like to introduce Julianne Inarelli, the Chief Impact Officer, to take the stage.
Hello and welcome. It's my pleasure to greet you and to thank you for joining us today. Those of you who are network members or have been to a past session know GBSN as a not-for-profit network, bringing together business schools and other organizations, including businesses, foundations, and policy-making bodies in pursuit of our mission to improve access to quality, locally relevant management education. And if you're new to this series or to GBSN, you likely have come through your shared interest in using those global communities to help our world tackle complex problems that we all need for our sustainable development. Our impact communities, and this is one of them, are a key avenue for that kind of work to take place. Specifically, we're here today because of the work of the Energy Transition Impact Community. And I'd like to take just a quick moment to recognize the leaders of that group. It's been their vision for this series that has made it happen, and we're grateful for their leadership. Sarah Craig and Yashar Jassi Faragfal of the Rotterdam School of Management, Wazi Ngubavana and Maurice Rodabe of Wits Business School, and Greg Bean of the University of Houston. So we thank them for helping to bring this community together and bring some programming to you to help us all connect with one another on some important topics. Without any further ado, I'll pass the floor to Wazi Ngubavana, who will be our moderator for today. Wazi?
Thanks, Julian. Good morning and good afternoon to everybody, depending on which part of the world you're joining us from. And thank you very much for taking time out to join us for this conversation, which I think is a very, very important conversation. And it really just adds great value to, the previous conversations we've had. We've had a great discussion on framing the energy transition, both from a North and South Hemisphere perspective. And we've also taken time to have a look at how we can repurpose legacy assets. And today, we're looking at the role of technology, what role it can play in assisting us through this transition. Now, we are in the middle of, a great transition that has never been seen, or at least not in modern times anyway. And within that, I think, there lies a lot of opportunity, but also there's great challenges. And the point of today's conversation is really just to see what lessons we can learn from each other, being in North and Southern Hemispheres, and delve deep into the role that technology can play in helping us, during this transition. The way that technology goes, as we all understand, it plays a very significant role in our daily lives, and the energy sector is no different. And the way that technology is evolving is really going to spearhead the green energy transition. It's really going to revolutionize our approach to generation, distribution, and also consumption. Importantly, technology presents innovative solutions, to combat climate change and also to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. It's also very important to note that significant progress has been made over the last century, really, on renewable energy technology. But obviously, in the last 20 odd years, solar and wind technologies have drastically reduced in pricing, and they've become more cost effective. They've become more efficient. In fact, recent studies show that with solar technology, we are now approaching very quickly the theoretical limit of the technology in terms of how much we can actually draw, from the sun. Also very important in this revolution is things like smart grid systems that leverage technology and they optimize for the integration of renewable energy sources. Another very important aspect is the development of energy storage solutions, things like batteries. They play a really pivotal role in helping us seamlessly integrate, the intermittable nature of renewable energy technologies into our current grids. Now, it's important also to note that, while technology contributes in mitigating environmental impact of our energy sources, it creates fresh economic opportunities, and of course, adds a great value in fostering sustainable development. But it is with that in mind, though, that we do need to keep thinking about what we need to have in place for us to take advantage of technologies. It also necessitates, for example, the concurrent evolution of policies, markets, human interactions, and adoption. So there's a lot of challenge, but also a great opportunity. So today we are very fortunate to be joined by really great speakers who will be taking us through their thoughts, on the role of technology in helping us in the energy transition, but very importantly in helping ensure that it indeed does become a just transition, that it's not a transition that leaves anybody behind, that we can take all our communities, all of society really along with us on this journey. So to start off, I think I will introduce our panelists one by one. And as I introduce them, in fact, I'm going to do it a little different. I will let our panelists just very briefly, 30 seconds, give us an introduction of themselves, what they would like us to take out of the conversation today, and also to just give us a broad overview, perhaps in another 2 or 3 minutes, of their thoughts on the role of technology. So from the north, we've got, apologies, my screen just disappeared on me. We've got Dr. Yasha Gyasi Farukfal, who's an associate professor, Department of Technology and Operations Management at Rotterdam School of Management. And we also have Jos Rolling, is a senior architect at IBM, Global Business Services, at the Center of Competence for Energy Utilities in the Netherlands. In the south, we are represented by Thabo Mlekwa, who is the chairman of and MD of Siemens Energy, South Africa. And also, last but definitely not least, we've got Dr. Thembekazi Mali, who's the senior vice president for research and technology at Sasol. As you can see, this is a great panel that comes with many, many years of experience in the energy industry, but also very closely associated with technology development and implementation. So I'm going to start with Dr. Mali. Dr. Mali, in 30 seconds, can you tell us a little bit about you and what you're hoping we can get out of this conversation today?
Thanks, Lwazi, and good afternoon, everybody on the call. And thank you very much for the opportunity. I am Thembekazi Mali, as Lwazi has introduced me, and I'm a chemist by profession, and have been in technology and in petrochemical industry for close to 20 odd years. And I've been in technology most of my life. And Just for an introduction about technology, I think technology has evolved so much that it has a role to play, more especially in the just transition. And when we talk about just energy transition, it's just we do not want to leave anybody behind. And in the global South context, I think technology has a big role to play, because there are a lot of factors that need to be sorted by the technology that has evolved to really, like take solar, which can give which can be decentralized and give all our communities and all our far-flung areas and remote areas access to electricity. And if we know much about sub-Saharan Africa, which hosts the bulk of the energy poverty in the world. So technology has a role to play. Thanks, Laz.
Thank you very much. Thabo?
Thanks, Wazi. My name is Thabo Molekwa. As Wazi has alluded, I am responsible for the entire offering of Siemens Energy in Southern Africa, based out of Johannesburg. Mechanical engineer by background, spent a couple of at least around 2 decades or so in industries, primarily in the sub-Saharan Africa, and really around how do we industrialize Africa. And we know that energy is the bedrock of that industrialization effort. So I think my conversation today, Lwazi, would encompass 2 elements. I think the energy transition, I think our approach is twofold. There's a sense around a holistic approach in how we do energy transition, and looking at the ambit of the technologies we have in our portfolio. But the second element is also a step-by-step approach in embarking on the journey itself. And I'll elaborate a little bit more around that, because it's different for each country, it's different for each industry, and it will be different also for each customer or impacted areas. The second element, and a session I would like to put across perhaps in a conversation maybe we would agree on, that perhaps technology is not the problem, in a sense that technological solutions are there, and perhaps the issue might resonate more towards the implementation of those solutions, because then we have to scale it up to a scale that enables that we could see the impact of what we're trying to drive at. Thanks.
Thank you, Thabo. Dr. Yasha?
Yes, hello everyone. Thank you, Lauzi, for the introduction. My name is Yashar. I did my PhD in electrical and computer engineering at the University of Toronto, and then I joined Rotterdam School of Management in the Netherlands as an assistant prof, where I promoted as an associate lately. And my research focus has been energy transition for quite some time, and I'm very happy to be in this seminar. Also seeing the other panelists, I would say that it would be a very interesting discussion. Maybe 2 points that I want to focus on during my time. One is that the core evolution of the technology. If you think about the ecosystem of the whole energy transition, what's the role of technology in this ecosystem and how it can get help? And the other one is that what are the angles of technology that still needs to be improved further, and what are the important elements that we should focus more for the energy transition to be faster?
Thank you very much, Yasha. Yours?
Yeah, so yeah, thank you all. Very thrilled to be here and to understand the continent that I have not done a project so far. So I'm an associate partner at IBM Consulting, part of the Industry Center of Excellence for Energy. So I have a global footprint. My role is an IT architect, and I have a certification as Distinguished Architect by the Open Group. I have a bachelor degree of electrical engineering by the University of Rotterdam. Also I have a patent on zero knowledge proof energy trading that is honoring commercial privacy for balancing power, trading balancing power. And I think one of the personal drivers for me in the industry is to try to design systems that are more according to the European guidelines, as I understand it, and I see that it will resonate as well in the Southern Hemisphere, to be fair, inclusive, and democratic. So and that means that there is quite a support on platforms, and to see where those platforms rise, and not being very financial focused, but also like more sustainability and environmental and local community focused. For that, I created a small piece of paper pushing the notion of programmable energy. So perhaps we can address that later on as well. So, and I'm in close collaboration with Yassar. Very fun to be in this network and be looking forward to today.
Thank you very much, Jos. Ladies and gentlemen, as you can tell, we've got a very, very powerful panel with us. So today's conversation is really that. It's a conversation, and I really want to encourage you to drop questions in the chat. We will try and get your questions through to the panel. If you've got a question aimed at a specific panelist, please do mention them by name. Otherwise, I will pose the questions as they come through. I'll leave them open to the panel really to discuss. Now, to get us started with this conversation, I thought it was important that we start with a sort of a general assessment of the current state of innovation in technology for clean energy. And this can be, in generation, distribution, and of course, consumption. So Dr. Mali, I'm going to start with you, if you don't mind. Can you just give us a view of the current state of innovation? And also, I think, just try and tie in on, how far do you think we are in terms of progress versus where we need to be for us to be transitioning, in the different clean energy value chains?
Thanks, Lazwi. I think maybe I'm just gonna probably start by saying that I think most of us know that in the road to renewable energy is littered with failure. But I think in the South African context, somehow things have just changed, because in the unfortunate situation that we're in of load shedding, we've seen that people are trying very much to be self-sufficient and actually then have their own energy security, so that they don't rely too much on our utility. Which brings me back to what happened like in the, could be in the late 70s and 80s. Rural communities were then given solar panels. But because the solar panels were not seen in the urban areas, and most of that was never sustainable. But now, because now we actually do see that in this advent of us having an country energy shortage, almost everybody wants to be sustainable, and they're putting in solar panels. So in that sense, I think with like you did mention before, that the cost of renewable energy, specifically solar and wind, have come drastically down. And so the access to such technologies now is actually not that, it is reachable. So people now are getting to be self-sufficient and getting themselves renewable energy fitted. But I don't think we have done even a dent, because there's quite a lot of communities where energy poverty is still a problem. So we have a long way to go still. And that could be, why these communities are still not energy sufficient could be just a function of, I think maybe Thabo did allude to it, maybe the ecosystem as it stands, and the fact that we are not holistically looking at the problem, and there's no one solution that fits every situation. So I'm not sure if okay, it was, yeah. I mean, I cannot even see anybody.
Thank you. And in fact, if you don't mind, I also want to follow up on that, and just tease a little bit, within the space that you're in, which is, liquid fuels, specifically, within Sasol. How far do you think we are? Are we advancing at the rate we should be advancing in terms of moving towards greener fuels? Or do you think, there's still areas where we need to prioritize further investment?
I think the issues about advancing, we could say green liquid fuels, we're still way behind, because there are two things that we probably need to do. We need to have a market pull, and we also need to have some regulations. And I think if you remember, South Africa did have some regulations on biofuels, but because nothing was actually implemented in a manner that would have this market pull, and then the industry then never took off. So most of these things need to have a lot of enabling regulatory environment to actually get the sector started. Most possibly with liquid fuels, green liquid fuels.
No, understood. And I think, this touches very well on my introduction when I said, this challenge is going to take sort of a pulling and coming together of different sections of society, in terms of bringing in policy onto the table. It's going to speak to financing and all of that. So thank you very much for that response. Jos, where do you think we are? Are we anywhere near meeting our decarbonization or lowering of greenhouse gas emission goals? Are we that far behind, or in terms of technological development, have we made great strides? And is there somewhere we should be focusing our investments in?
That was a question to me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. So I was not sure. Yeah, I think that you see quite a different speed of adoption for renewable energy and decarbonization. I think that the whole market is more financial driven, fueled and having a tailwind from all the regulations that are being done. So the Paris agreements and the ESG reporting that is now more pressing. It was very supportive that the head of BlackRock supported the whole sustainability movement to push every company that they invest in as mandatory to have sustainability as part of their corporate agenda. So I think that's a good one. From the technology side, so I'm more focusing on electricity rather than on the carbon fuel kind of industries. And I think that the electrification of industries in the industrial world will have a huge impact on the current infrastructures that are currently running on its last legs already. So when we see huge impact on availability of resources and skills around the globe, for extending our grids. And I think that that has to do with one of the, I think, assumptions of the systems that we built in the past that we need to reevaluate. So to my observation, the current grids were installed and designed as an all-you-can-eat system. So everyone can consume up to his grid connection, and perhaps with all those intermittents, it should shift to another model. So and my son was working in Zimbabwe when he was doing his bachelor degree of electrical engineer on energy management for a local clinic, And there it's not intermittent as we experience in the West, where there is less energy, so the mix of energy generation shifts. No, it's grid outage or grid availability. So, and I think that if we can meet each other, and then find a solution that will reduce your energy consumption or your energy generation in an elegant way, such that it honors the constraints of the network, so that we have a collaborative effort providing energy to all. I think that would be then a way forward. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Jos. Thabo, your thoughts on a similar question? Is our gas turbines, being innovative enough? Are we getting more efficient? Are we getting better at doing this? Our grid systems, our smart grids, are we moving at the pace we should be moving? Is our blockchain technologies, coming to the fore? Where are we?
Yeah, I think in my case, Lwazi, I sit with the task of representing an organization that sits in the north, right? And I have the realities of the south. And I'll reflect on both of those. I wonder if I can share an image, because it will help me a little bit later on. I'll try that. But essentially, our take is that the energy transition towards a low carbon economy is inevitable. Different speeds between the global north and global south. But I think what is quite abundant is that there will be a fundamental reorganization of how economies, especially in the global south, will look like. The strong view is also around this reorganization needs to be done in a just manner, and it needs to afford an opportunity that addresses the social ills that has come out in the previous speakers. But we have to also see strong investments, new jobs, skill sets, and so on. From a technological perspective, what we do see is that we do need to double down on our efforts to accelerate some of the next generation future technologies that we need, especially if we are to meet our 2050 net zero targets. Because a lot of these technologies that we need for 2050 are actually still in prototype phases, and they need to be deployed. And here the reference for me, it's around larger and economic scale when I talk about deployment. If you look at from our side, from renewable energy sources to electrolyzers that we often talk about, electrification, digitalization, you alluded to. But these technologies for us, we see that they require additional investments I'm talking about power to X, some of the long duration storage systems, and then even solutions like cyber security, digital solutions. All of those, we're saying they're not at the grander scale that's required for the type of ambitions that we have or we need. It doesn't mean there isn't any work that has happened. You will see, and I think that was the second part I thought it might be good to show, because we often view that, I hope the picture is clearer. Our approach to how we look at energy transition and the myriad of technologies. As a technology provider, we see that we have a breadth of these technologies. But when you look at the energy transition, you would have to see it from a holistic perspective, in other words, trying to marry the pieces together. But when you execute and implement, you have to look at it stepwise, because you cannot do all of them at the same time. So you have to move from a phase of working on energy efficiency, which is more, how do you get more power out of the current fuel that you're using? And then gravitating to using low carbon fuels, and then in a deep carbonization phase, this is where you now talk about the new energy carriers and the power to X and so on. I make this reference because it becomes quite important when we get to the question of how far are we? And the how far are we, for me, I'm saying, if we have to look at energy efficiency perspective, a lot of those technologies exist. We talk about gas turbines, they exist. Now they can be retrofitted to run on a portion being coal-fired by hydrogen. Some of those we've worked on efficiencies from that perspective. In a grid perspective as well, we're starting to see SF6 free transformers coming into the market, digitalizing your grids a lot more to work on efficiencies and so on. So a myriad of those exist, but the realities of the South are different from some of the technologies that are there. And I think that's the initial comment I made, that the technological advancements are there, especially on an energy efficiency perspective. But if you look at the realities of Global South, is heavily reliant on energy security. How do I become energy secure and not yet into the sphere of working on energy efficiency perspectives?
Thank you very much, Thabo. If I am to summarize some of what you said, one being that the technologies do exist, but it's a question of where we're applying them currently, and secondly, priorities in terms of our journey, whether it's energy security or it is now fully focusing on decarbonization. And I think this leads me to my next question, and that's for you, Yasha. And that is, how do you see the different investment priorities, for specific regions, particularly in the Global North? But, if you do have some thoughts on the Global South as well, please feel free to share with us.
Yeah, interesting discussion, because I want to build on what was discussed, that I do agree that most of the technology that we need for transition is already there. So in terms of innovation, at least in terms of innovation, we are innovation of technology, we are far ahead of the other elements that needs to be there. But we don't perhaps have them at the scale that we need. And this is partially related to the fact that there are multiple elements that needs to co-evolve with the technology, and without them, technology cannot be adopted at the speed that's needed. We're discussing the differences between Global North and Global South. I don't have much information about, and there are experts here, so I don't want to comment on that. But what I can say is that in thinking about the best technology, and you have to also be aware of all the potentials of each jurisdictions. I give two examples of Emirates versus Netherlands, because these are the two countries that I am to a good extent aware of the energy transition. So Emirates is heavily relying on fossil-based transportation. They don't have that much of electric vehicles. Of the power sector, 50% is coming from gas, 43% is coming from oil. The country is having a lot of sunny days, and they have the vicinity to the sea. So if you want to think that what are the best investments that they are putting in place for energy transition, they're putting a lot of solar power. They're investing a lot in R&D in energy storage, and they are also moving towards hydrogen. And the reason that they are doing it is that because they have a great gas infrastructure, and that can be retrofitted for hydrogen. They have vicinity to the sea, so they can use the seawater for their electrolyzers. And water desalination is already happening at large scale there, because that's how they get their water. And apart from solar power, energy storage, and hydrogen, they're also putting a lot of effort on carbon capture, storage, and usage, because the transition towards 100% renewable electricity cannot happen in medium term. So they have to think about CCU and CCS as an alternative technology. In the Netherlands, We also have a lot of fossil-based power. 52% of the electricity is coming from gas, 34% is coming from coal. But it's not a sunny country compared to Emirates. It's what it has as potentials is wind and vicinity to the sea. So they have the investment in the Netherlands is towards wind power. Hydrogen is also a technology that it is being invested on in this country because of also the gas infrastructure they have and also the sea vicinity. And apart from wind power and hydrogen, they're also having a lot of potentials in coupling the transportation sector and power sector to electric vehicle adoption, because the country is one of the best countries in Europe in terms of how many electric vehicles they have. So that also brings a lot of potentials for energy transition. So in short, if you want to think about the best fit technology, that's really dependent on the potentials that we have in the country, but also there are many other elements such as the geopolitics, the policies that you have, and also a cultural fit that you have to see that what technology can be adopted better in that jurisdiction.
Thank you very much, Yasha. Thabo, if I can come back to you on this question of priorities, investment priorities in particular. You know, we've got three competing needs. One being, you know, reducing our reliance on fossil fuels. Of course, also, you know, second one being increasing our investment on renewable energy sources, but also very importantly, the improving of local economies and standards of living. What do you think the Global South should be focusing its investment efforts on?
Yeah, it's a very important question because I have a feeling that the current investment priorities seem to run counter to the country priorities or needs. You know, for example, generally in the Global South, there's a focus, and I use South Africa as a pointed example here, but there's a focus on reducing the reliance on fossil fuel or increasing renewables at a faster pace than perhaps one of the more growing issues around improving socioeconomic conditions. So my observation would actually say, how do we find a balance that reflects the following priorities? Perhaps the first priority is, how do we find and unearth technologies that could enable better standards of living, improving the local economies? Because that would help with youth unemployment issues, poverty issues, energy security issues as well. And generally, if we look even outside of South Africa, it's just around general electrification rates, because a lot of the organizations are still trying to electrify as much as possible in the various countries. And therefore that I would say as a first one. The second one that follows immediately after that is the benefits of expanding renewables. Because I think if applied correctly, we could diversify from fossil fuels at the right pace, to also be able to reach some of the far-flung rural areas that the normal conventional grid cannot get to or is expensive to get to. And in this case, I think about solar PV technologies. You could think about mini grids as well in the same breath. And I think those where I think investment ought to go into, as opposed to where it's heavily now skewed towards, because that I think creates a little bit of friction in its local communities as well, and obviously negativity around energy transition.
Thank you, Thabo. Well, very clearly, there are no easy solutions. And I think whatever solutions we get to has got to be compromises made. There's got to be prioritization that's done depending on the local context. Jos, if I can come to you, I think just delving a little bit deeper on technologies, what do you see as sort of the top 2 or 3 technologies, that you think are most important in the regions that you're familiar with, to help us along, in this transition journey towards a low carbon energy system?
Yeah, so there are a number of technologies being tested and implemented for the last 5-6 years. And then for the IT domain, that is then primarily blockchain and tokenization kind of solutions. That supports more the lack of trust, the lack of doing provenance on trade chains that are needed to build new ecosystems. My projects were initially in the western part of the northern hemisphere due to the deregulation of those integrated companies. And so that left the situation in a scattered field of entities, organizations, and that needed to collaborate again. So that's one of the technologies that we bring to bear. Most recently, I came to the realization that the traditional control systems and the traditional definition of smart grid, which is running on SCADA systems. So those are the systems designed in the 80s that only measure and control the critical elements of the grid, needs to be replaced. And there's now a new movement and momentum going on to redesign those systems. And I think that the smart grid we need to extend beyond smart metering being deployed and some control systems and at critical high mid voltage stations to include all different aspects of the grid, and also to be innovative, to find better ways of addressing the constraints of the network. And for me, it means that we need to create and design a system that collectively has an emergent effect to honor the limitations of the grid. So that a system is not overloading the grid, but has an understanding of it. And most recently, with all the buzz around AI and large language models, foundation models that are underneath, that's a new area that we need to research and to see how those foundation models should be designed and created, and also how those AI models can interact with each other, because we need to have a multi-party system. So that's something that is especially, I think, relevant for today, to see how local communities, or even then a group of local communities, how they can then cooperate and play with those new technologies like AI, blockchain, and tokenization stuff. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Jos. Dr. Mali, just taking into account, the complexities and the context of the global South as already outlined. In your perspective, what's the 2 or 3 most important technologies we should be focusing on? It's well and good that AI and large learning models are, coming into the fore. It's great that blockchain is, making strides, but some of these may not, be as top priorities for the global South. So what in your view is the top 2 or 3, and also what are the challenges do you see in us moving towards a lower carbon energy system?
Razi, thank you. Firstly, I think I'm just going to concentrate on communities and the communities that are energy poor. And I think the beauty of solar is one of the technologies that can be off grid and could be hybrid system. And then these systems can then be implemented in the areas where the grid doesn't reach, because the far-flung areas in South Africa, the grid will not reach. We know that South Africa probably we have one of the longest and the best grid in sub-Saharan Africa. However, there are areas where the grid will not reach. So I think decentralized systems will then be able to then serve those communities better. And actually, I mean, within that decentralized area, we could also have things that can actually catalyze local economies when we have the productive use of energy. When you look at if you have schools, if you have clinics, which are powered by containerized energy systems. So you have your containers with energy where you can actually have like local businesses being powered by solar. And you also have, I mean, that would then give a lot of jobs because then we have job creation in this particular community. And you also look at agri-voltaics because, I mean, you know that some of our communities are, they have livestock and they also are small holders and they have a subsistence farming. They could also have like their livelihood from agrivoltaics. So for me, at this particular moment in these underserved communities, I think solar will be one of the best options. But then what is the challenge? The challenge is mostly how then these services are then priced, because this now comes as a service and it does need to come at a price. And the cost has to be sustainable. The cost has to be affordable for the people that you actually you are supplying these services to. And then it brings us, maybe we then need to have better financial mechanisms and regulatory mechanisms to actually then to better serve those communities with these energy services that we want to bring to them.
Thank you very much. I think if I were to sum up what you're saying is that we need to make sure that this is a just transition, that we do involve everybody. The technologies that we're deploying has got to be context centered. It's got to focus on the people. It's got to focus on jobs. It's got to focus on, you know, as we're developing technologies, it's got to focus on making sure that we make use of local resources. Yasha, I want to just come to you on this one. Where do you see as the biggest challenges, you know, in terms of these technology developments and this path that we're on? You know, I'm thinking things like foreign investment. I'm thinking things like technologies actually being customized, you know, for specific regions, government policies, perhaps, you know, that you've thought about. So what do you see as the biggest challenges for you?
Yeah. So if we think about the technology from the innovation phase all the way to the deployment phase, there are multiple stakeholders involved, from all the international relationship and how things like war can affect the movement of technologies and which technologies are more viable and more feasible in a certain region, all the way to national political level, that what are the political forces in each country to advocate certain technology, and moving down to the organizational collaborations, because the energy transition is not a single stakeholder problem. We have different energy vectors, and we have different energy sectors, and the energy transition needs the collaboration of all of these organizations: the power sector, transportation sector, building industry. They all need to collaborate such that this energy transition happens. And each of them have their own agenda, their own objectives, and sometimes they collide. So there should be a better coordination across different sectors. When we particularly talk about electrification, yeah, there are many technologies are evolving around electrification, but this is really pushing all the pressure of energy transition and decarbonization to power sector, and power sector by itself, it has its own problems. Awareness is a big element. This is basically the main element that is recognized as the adoption of the main blockage of the technology at this point, because if there is enough awareness, people are perhaps more willing to adopt new technologies. They're more willing to reduce their consumption, and reduction of the consumption is maybe more important than creating more opportunities for generation. So awareness for every technology that we try to expand is a big issue. Pre-studying the effect of new technologies in terms of safety, sustainability, ethical issue, fairness, efficiency, and you name it. The pre-study phase is very important. Before we advocate for certain technology, it is very important to think ahead of the consequences of having that technology at large scale. And we have seen many examples in different countries that taxes and subsidies advocate certain technology, and then they realize that it will have other consequences that they haven't thought about before. Having proper market mechanism, that's also a big factor. You also mentioned that as this financial driver is a big push for every technology we can think of. This is basically the main problem with hydrogen technology, that hydrogen technology is there, but it's not at an economical scale. So how can we create that demand for hydrogen, for example? What are the best market mechanisms that can create a fair and efficient adoption of a certain technology? And last but not least, security will be an important factor when we are moving towards more complicated technologies, because we are moving towards an automated system, and then security will be a big factor that we have to think about before adopting certain technologies.
Thank you very much, Yasha. Well, it's pretty clear that this is a very complex problem with multiple competing needs, multiple players that have to be involved. And I think as a result, we are going to need new operating models. We can no longer continue, sort of on silo kind of approach. We've got to really view this as a complex system. And Thabo, do you think technology can offer us anything as we look to coordinate these, aligning these different objectives and protocols?
I believe so. I think there's vast untapped potential behind technology. I think one of the things that I always refer to is that I think if we take a case in point, is a lot of global South countries, if we could have a combination of a skilled workforce and with the right government support structures and policies, and you bring out the investment capital, so be it the technology, be it the other resources and so on, I think you could have a less problematic energy transition that ensues, because it will then delve into parts around how do you localize parts of the technologies that we bring forth. I mean, there's a case in point around, if you look at the solar panels, where they come from, or you look at where the wind turbines come from, and you look at the deployment of where it happens, there's a clear mismatch around the benefits and being ensued, or at least being realized by the local community. So that brings a lot of mistrust, I think, in terms of what technology does bring, and therefore perhaps some of the resistance around trying to transition and so on. But if we take that as in a positive outlook with the view, let's say, in argument's sake, a green hydrogen as an example, you could see that that's clearly going to be the energy future, or the energy source of the future. How do we prep ourselves around that? so that we could best maximize some of the developments or even some of the benefits that come from, because that also includes, for me, Lwazi, elements around not just the tech itself, but also the input materials that goes into the technology. So be it the platinum group metals that could come, be it the various constituents materials that sit, and a lot of those are available in Africa, right? So how then do we play around with a multitude of those to make sure that we view technology as a great enabler as opposed to what has become practice in the past?
Thank you very much, Thabo. So I think this next question really, I want to just ask my entire panel, but I'll start with you, Jos. Do you think on a global scale, is there broader changes perhaps that need to happen to help accelerate the clean transition towards a clean energy system?
Yeah, so we see the same pattern, I think, replicating throughout the world. Yeah, so in Australia, the percentage of solar generation is more than total consumption. In the UK, there are days where renewable energy is 100% for their consumption, and the fighting the intermittence. So and then on different granularity levels. So in the south, they have an experience with grids being on and off. So their resilience has quite a different connotation, and they all know and know how to deal with outages and also how to start the grid again. That capability is not available in the north. So we don't have any major outages. So and that's something I think that we need to master in a more very granular level. So I think that the topic that we have not discussed yet, and I'm not an expert on it, but storage is really a way out. And I'm working with a number of behind-the-meter storage solutions and their impact on the grid congestion, grid quality. So those are very promising initial studies and projects that I'm currently undertaking. But the current percentage of storage is very, very low compared to other supply chains, if you consider the electricity industry as a supply chain. So a lot of hope is on battery development, but we need to have, in the meanwhile, I think, a digital layer. So and I think that in the south, I hope that the same with mobile payments. Mobile payments took off like wildfire in the south, with, for instance, M-Pesa and other programs, due to the very basic infrastructure that's already there. So and I hope and I envision for the south to use that same infrastructure for the energy communities. Because if you have an energy community with some local generation, then not everyone owns the local generation. So how do you do then a microeconomy in a fair, inclusive, and equal, without being on the low end of geopolitical place? Because investments, as already discussed in local communities, that's a very complicated matter. Finance. So, and I'm a volunteer at the Two Tokens Foundation, just for me to understand and to collaborate with people from finance, from legal, to have that cross knowledge expertise to make those changes happen. It's not a technology play, as already expressed. It's not a single element. It's a multi-dimensional challenge that we need to face.
Thank you very much, Jos. Dr. Mali, I think same question really. On the global scale, is there like broad changes that you think should be happening to help us accelerate our movement towards a cleaner energy system?
Globally, I think what we probably, I think there are technologies, just technology and skills transfer. Some of the things that we probably could be doing, like the global south and the global north, because some of the technologies are, when you talk, let's talk about the advance in solar panels. So the global north, they have now moved to solar panels that are more efficient, and then you actually probably don't need as much as you probably need. So there's to be like technology transfer, skills transfer, and so that we can accelerate our deployment of all these technologies. And also when you look at the wind technologies, if we could have those skills transfer and development of that capacity within our continent, then we would then be able to deploy these technologies faster and with the capacity and skills on our continent. And secondly, I think maybe again, I mean, it comes back to incentives and regulations and finance, because we cannot just do it. I mean, some of these things need to be financed, and having innovative finance mechanisms, which then will assist with the deployment. We also need to have that as instruments. And I still feel that if we want, I mean, awareness is also one of those things. I think you probably know better than in South Africa with the, I think somebody I think yours did mention that awareness is an important thing. In South Africa, you have IPPs who have all these solar farms and wind farms in communities that actually do not even have electricity. So, I mean, that for me is one of the travesty of probably what we're having in South Africa. So awareness and actually making communities where these deployments are be beneficiaries of the electricity that is being harnessed on their properties. So I mean, that basically calls for just and universal, access to the energy.
Thank you very much. Yasha, what do you think needs to co-evolve between the global north and the global south for us to be able to deploy these technologies, much faster and much broader, and they're embraced by the different markets?
Yeah, I think definitely knowledge sharing is the first thing, because there are differences, and we should learn from each other and know the differences and what solution fits what situation. So there is no silver bullet, there is no solution for all. So we have to find under what condition, what is the best portfolio of the technologies. Jos mentioned energy storage, and I think that energy storage is a very good example of a technology that couples global north and south, and this is one of the technologies that I think that they should change a lot. It is highly needed for the proper energy transition. Without it, that cannot be possible. And when we talk about energy storage, mostly we think about batteries, but we all know that batteries has a lot of problems in terms of the raw materials. We're using a lot of rare earth metals such as lithium and cobalt, and we also hear a lot of non-ethical way of having them. So it is very controversial, and it doesn't look to be sustainable. So a lot of R&D funds should go into other types of storage. It's not only batteries, or it's not only lithium-ion batteries. There are many other sources of energy storage that can be evolved. There is a whole range of storage technologies, but it should be at the scale that it is reliable and it is scalable. Other things such as a proper transition, because the grid infrastructure in global north is doesn't allow for radical changes. So we know microgrids could be a great solution for resilience. That is not a lot of possibilities in Europe to have microgrids as the starting point. But we know in global south that could be a great solution. Or the transition towards capturing all carbons through carbon capture storage, or moving towards green hydrogen through blue hydrogen. All of these intermediate technology that can help and smooth out the path towards full decarbonization. They're highly important. Another thing that it is missing at the moment is using the flexibilities that you can gain in system integration and intersectoral coupling. And they are very important. There are a lot of potentials. Intersectoral storage devices are one of them, but they're still at very initial phases, and most of innovation, I would say, is going in the power sector, and the other sectors are really lagging behind.
Thank you very much, Esha. Thabo, what do you think we can borrow from the North to make this transition a reality for the South?
I think I would include, maybe to broaden the question a little bit, to talk about what we can borrow, but also what we could, because I think they also have some struggles in some of the elements I'm thinking of. Because I think the first tonality we need to agree on when we talk about energy transition is this question of pace. Because this is where I think a lot of friction originates around embracing of technologies and so on. So I think if we can agree on pace being highly dependent on each, call it local nuances, then I think it becomes easier to then talk about the question of borrowing, because I think otherwise it becomes one way. I do think one of the things that we need to address is this question of, at least for me, around how do we get to a point where there's political action around some of the infrastructure that's required for these technologies. I think we have seen when Germany was faced with the challenges given the Russia-Ukraine situation, there was political will behind to make Germany energy secure. And I think that's something that Global South could borrow around. How do we make sure that we take the big steps with speed, decisively, to start to ensue and make sure that we also focus on our energy security? And the second part, it's around partnership. I think we've often seen various models around partnership or collaboration. One of the things we need to talk about in collaboration is how does it become mutually beneficial? And if you look at how a lot of the global North industries are all based on mutual benefits that are seen by the rest of the communities and the population. So I think that's something that we need to be quite upfront about in the Global South, because then it spills into topics around localization for our own benefit, value adding in some of the technologies and value chains. But more importantly, also, it then helps to encourage local demand. And I think those are one of the things we could borrow. And the last one is, and I know it's been said before, it's the finance. I think, you know, we really need to have governments that look responsibly around this risk-reward profile, especially on different technologies, to try and remove obstacles and regulations that could prevent companies from delivering some of the promising ventures. And I think there's a lot of examples that you see in the Global North where the political action, the will of the government has placed so much emphasis to making sure that certain investments go through, be it from a loan programs, be it even direct investments themselves. And I think that's something that could be beneficial to the Global South.
Thank you very much, Thabo. Yours, What do you think the North can borrow from the South?
I think there are quite some very interesting experiences to borrow from the South. So one is to learn how to go with intermittent availability. So the lack of resilience, how you can compensate with other means and mechanisms and patterns. So, and also to see how, as Yassar alluded to, those microgrids are being built and how they're being adopted and scaled. You know, so the European grids are single direction energy flows only. You know, so and in that new world with decentral generation, you need to have bidirectional energy flows. Those grids are not being built out in Europe. You know, so that's something that we can learn how to build, how to scale it. You know, in the South. And I think also from the financial standpoint, yeah. So I think that understanding the financial, social aspects of local communities and local energy communities reflected in Europe as energy collectives, energy cooperatives, energy communities, all those different organization forms. So and what elements do you need to bring to make it a success? You know, so we identified in the Two Tokens Foundation that it is not only technology, it's not only IT, but also the ESG aspects of it. Also, and especially governance. How do you set up your governance to initiate such a platform, such a community during high tides, during low tides, also during change of policy. So and also to see how then not only have the technology angle like generation, storage, and consumption, but also all the processes that are being implemented in Europe on a national scale, how to scale it down and how to have it in contact with the national kind of systems. Because you need to do the accounting for generation and consumption. You need to do some financial benefits. So that's something that I'm very eager to learn and see develop in the South. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Well, I have come to the end of my questions. I'm going to go into the chat and see what our audience would really like to talk about. But before I get to that, I think for me, out of this conversation, there's quite a number of things that have come out. One, I think very importantly being that technologies do exist already, you know, to help us transition. But it becomes a question of how do we make these technologies acceptable? How do we make them affordable? How do we make sure that the transition is inclusive? So this speaks to the involvement of communities. It speaks to policy making. It speaks to you know, firm decision making by governments, and of course, you know, the financial sector coming to play. And I think also for me, what's also come out very important is that actually there is lessons that we can learn from each other. You know, you also just alluded to now, for example, lessons on resilience, which is not something that's necessarily built into the systems of the North. And I think, you know, the Southern Hemisphere, perhaps out of necessity, has had to learn and adapt very quickly and develop the skills, you know, to build up resilience. And I think that is certainly something, you know, to be proud of and to be skills that we actually can share. And we need to put value on those skills as the Global South, and say we can trade, you know, with our northern partners. And I think also just touching on partnerships, I think that's something that's come out very strongly for me in this conversation, that we have to work together, you know, to make these systems work, because the technologies don't all reside in one place. You know, the materials also don't all reside where the technologies are. The skills aren't necessarily, you know, where the materials are. So there's got to be an exchange. But I think something we really didn't touch much on, and I think Thabo did allude a little bit to that, and that is equality in terms of trading, in terms of how we approach these partnerships. that we really look at them as partnerships of equals, you know, and not one basically flowing from one direction to the other, and that, you know, this is something that we've got to work together as the globe. Now, to comments, I'm just looking at the chat. So there's a comment from Pat. It says, lack of infrastructure and limited reach and of transmission distribution lines. Yes, that is a big issue in terms of this just transition or this transition. And it is something that absolutely has to be addressed. And then there's a comment, I'll see if it's a question. Okay, there is a question attached to that. This is from Nyasha, who says, to all the panel members, my views are that the Global South is a consumer / retail market of established renewable technologies. I won't argue with that, as well as the source of green hydrogen. Excuse me. The question asked is, what are the opportunity costs of being in this predicament for the energy consumers in the Global South and the development of energy efficient markets / infrastructure? I think, Thabo, that is probably for you.
It certainly sounded like I need to respond to this one. I think the first paragraph, first statement, yeah, I think it's true. I agree. You also alluded to that. There's something that has happened, I think, when we started to filter in geopolitical developments as becoming significant in being energy secure. You know, we started to see, especially Russia, Ukraine started, and I think that's one of the things that we started to see as being risky for a country. So therefore, when you look at what you ought to be doing, I think you ought to try and make sure that the energy sovereignty of a country becomes important. That's one of the risks that I see out of that point that Nyasha has raised. And it also becomes abundantly clear when you start looking at the massive scale up of renewables that has happened. So where do solar PVs come from? Where do the turbines? And large parts of these technologies don't originate from here. So when you are faced with the challenges and so on, how then do you ensure that the choices you've made don't come back to become problematic for you? So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, I think what we do have as a energy market is historical. I think it needs to be seen in that light. So there is something, at least from my side, what I see as advantageous is that we have learnings to pick from history around how those industries, developments have evolved over time, and therefore how do we then learn out of it and pick best practices from it. And I used an example of green hydrogen as something that's still nascent, still something that needs to scale up. Knowing what we know now based on the history and what we have seen, how do we make sure that we get the best benefits out of those? Not only in terms of local production, but also quite important around local demand and usage of it. How do we also decarbonize in the mobility sector and so on? So I think there's a number of things that requires, call it the necessary preparatory ground, the infrastructure, to enable that we don't end up in the same position that Nyasha refers to.
All right. No, great response. Thank you, Thabo. Then there is a comment from Arthur. Yasha, I will hand this one to you. Says, in the US, there's been substantial investment in wind and solar, but grid development lags behind. And I think, in fact, this is not unique to the US, to be fair. I think in the Global South, we're facing the same problem. South Africa, for example, you know, currently in some of the areas with the best solar and wind resources, the grid is congested. And in fact, there's big, you know, conversations, even a court case running right now on the issue of grid allocation. But nonetheless, back to Arthur's statement, says if the grid were more developed, wind and solar would be even more efficient and we could retire fossil fuel uses faster. Investment in efficiency is left to local decision makers. And it says clearly no size fits all, and that is true, but which is more pressing, the more pressing need for investment? Is it generation, efficiency, or transmission? What do you think?
Very good question. So as you also mentioned, there is no single solution that fits all. In the portfolio projection that they have for 2050, we indeed have a combination of all of these solutions together: efficiency, carbon capture, storage, renewables, flexibility. So there is no single solution. We have to combine all these solutions. But you're indeed right that especially now that we are at the starting point of pushing a lot of renewables to the power sector without the grid being ready for it, we see a lot of congestion that is happening, especially at the generation level. We see it very frequently in the Netherlands that congestion at the DSO level happens, particularly at the generation level, to the point that they are limiting the new installations of rooftop solar panels. So you have to think about what are the other solutions that you have, and the solutions that they are taking now in the Netherlands is to use the flexibility that you have locally to contain the congestion problem in the local level as much as possible. And the best source of flexibility for now is electric vehicles. So they're using the flexibility in the electric vehicle that they have. Now they are setting up something that's called a local flexibility market, that the DSOs are the market operators, and they incentivize that the aggregators play in these markets, and they say that how much flexibility they can provide. But thinking about the efficiency is a great solution, but it's not the fastest solution. So efficiency comes with a better technology, or if you're thinking about incentivizing and demand response, that's something that might take some time. But there are also programs that they improve the installations of the houses, and they try to improve the energy efficiency at the building level. So all of these things are solutions, but none of them can be the only solution that can solve this problem, in my view, because the scale of renewables and the major changes that they need to have to incorporate renewables, that's not the problem. This problem cannot be solved with only strengthening and enforcing the grid, or to improve the efficiency, or to provide more storage. You need all these solutions all together.
Thank you very much, Yasha. And then there is a question, I think it's the last question.
Sorry,
Sure.
Bazi, if I may, because I think that I think you also alluded to, the question is actually very good question, but also very broad, right? Because I then think, although it starts with the US, I think there's a number of, and the point I want to make is that it depends on where you are at as a starting point, you know. So one of the things quite interesting is if I look at, for instance, Angola sits in the late 40s in terms of electrification rate. However, they have excess capacity of about 2,000 megawatts of hydro. They can't move it in the country. So for them, the transmission becomes a priority. Whereas if you take an example of Egypt and Morocco with 100% electrification rate, there we could arguably say efficiency needs to be what's topical for them, right? So I think it becomes a little bit different. And you could even arguably say when you get into a country, you could go to cities, metros, and so on. It will always vary depending on what is the sort of a focus area.
No, agreed. So local context will always be important. And I think that brings me to the last question that we have. And I think this is a burning question for everybody, really. But Dr. Mali, I'll take your thoughts first, and then yours can follow after that. And this is, considering the competing needs of energy security, economic growth, social impact, and sustainability. How do we use technology to transition without compromising any of these needs? I know that's a very difficult question to answer and it's very broad, but if you could just give us your quick thoughts on that.
I think, for me, if you have energy security, then you will have local development, or the economy will grow, but you need to have energy. You cannot have jobs without energy, but I think your starting point is to have energy and energy security. And from there, then you will have economic growth, then you'll have jobs. So, I know it's not like one, but energy for me is the major. You have to have sustainable, affordable energy. And if you have that, then the economy will grow.
And then you're able to use technology to transition without worrying about compromising, the energy security. Okay, no, fantastic. Your thoughts? How do you utilize technology without compromising any of these needs?
Yeah, so I think that energy is one of the foundations of any economy, right? So money can be swapped by trading, but there is no alternative for energy. So I think that's a foundation for each economy. And then moving forward, I think the digital layer on top of the energy solutions that we discussed, I think needs to be fair, inclusive, democratic. So the ethical aspects, are a very good driver. And I find an example out of Denmark where local heating is needed in communities, and there is a policy law that those entities are not allowed to make any profit. So those are local heating solutions, and I think those are things that we need to revisit again. Those ancient ways of getting a cooperative running and get the energy for everyone. And I think indeed, as already expressed, the economy and economic activities will grow, and then you go into a flying wheel. But I think for now, the momentum is there to tap the exponential technology like AI, like blockchain, like tokenization, to build a modern version of those ancient ways of collaborating.
Thank you very much. Inclusivity. Yasha, any thoughts on how we utilize technology without compromising any of these other needs?
So maybe something that that we haven't talked about is energy data sharing. So there is a big push from European Commission that this is now becoming essential for the technology, especially AI and data analytics in the energy sector to move forward. And that is the bottleneck at the moment. So that's also something that we need to, in general, it's needed to be improved for the energy transition to move forward. Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we've come to almost the very end of our time together, but I would really like to have 20 seconds, your final thoughts on the role of technology in ensuring a just energy transition. Thabo, may I start with you? Very brief.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. I think the key takeaway from me, I think there's greater benefit from kind of a global North and global South collaboration. And I spoke about what kind of collaboration. And I think if anything that needs to drive our collaboration, it needs to be how do we scale up for action? And I think let's collaborate around actions that needs to ensue, because we would not reach the 1.5 degree Celsius target in any case, that we are behind. And therefore, I think we need to be bringing us together, collaborating and scaling up the actions to ensure we meet the targets.
Thank you very much. Dr. Mali, 20 seconds, your last thoughts.
Last thoughts. I really think, I mean, we want to be inclusive. We don't want to destroy the environment. So whatever technologies that we use have to be environmentally friendly. I mean, we have all these targets. I mean, your global targets don't want to kill the world. And then the next generation. I mean, we have borrowed the world from the next generation. So whatever it is that we're doing, it has to be environmentally friendly. So I think some of these things probably they are methods that maybe the global South has that are very very fundamental, but not necessarily high technology, which we can still tap, which we can tap into. So we have to look at such technologies and how do we marry the technologies that we have with what we have in our communities, which is like our local communities, which have some technologies, but they may not necessarily be high tech.
Thank you very much. Let's co-create and let's learn from each other. Jos, final thoughts?
Yes. Yeah, so I think that this conversation drives my conviction that we need to have an holistic approach and to steer for an emergent effect. And that emergent effect should account for constraints in every domain. Yeah, so not only the technology domain, but also social, environmental, sustainability. Yeah, so and that's something that we need to keep an eye on. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Dr. Yasha, your closing thoughts?
So I really like the discussion. Thank you all. I guess what I learned is that the collaboration between North and South is very instrumental. We can learn from each other. We can learn at what are the complexities of implementing, for example, microgrids and how people react to it. And something to learn from us is how different policies and taxation has been affected people's behavior and to avoid the negative consequences. And awareness is, my takeaway is that awareness is very important for the technology adoption.
Thank you very much. In closing, to my wonderful, wonderful panel, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts. I think for me, I take a great deal from this conversation. And yeah, I really do appreciate your time. And of course, to our VIPs, our guests joining us online, thank you so much for taking time to join us for this conversation. And I hope we do see you on our next session, which will be on the 29th of August, and where we'll be focusing now on the skills and development, particularly in business education. You know, it is very important that business schools play a big role in developing skills for the next generation of leaders in the energy space. So please do join us for that session. Invites will go out to all of those who have registered previously. And of course, just keep an eye out on all our social media channels as well. We'll continuously communicate as we get closer to the 29th of August. One last time, thank you very much to my wonderful panel. And Julianne, I don't know if you've got any final words.
No final words from me other than to echo your invitation to everyone here that we see you on the 29th of August, and to extend our thanks as well. Thabo, Tembakazi, Yashar, Jos, and Lwazi, especially for moderating our discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening. Have a great day. Those who are still starting their day. We are looking forward to rest after a very long day in the South. Thank you very much.